Hello, and thanks for having me. It's good to be here. We'll be talking about Getting More, a book by Stuart Diamond, who is a professor emeritus now at the Wharton Business School. And one of the things I think is important to realize is that this is just one negotiation methodology. There are many negotiation methodologies. And so I wanted to just quickly set it in context with some of the others, right? That when you talk to people specifically in the West about what are some of the best negotiation books, they'll tell you usually some combination of these five. And some have stood the test of time. They're 20 years old and yet they're still being listed, Getting More, et cetera, Getting to Yes. And some of them are collaborative, like Getting More and Getting to Yes, but some are adversarial, like Never Split the Difference, which treats the other person you're negotiating with as an opponent. Some are quite tactical, like Never Split the Difference, while some are very academic, research-based, like the negotiation genius. Getting More, Getting to Yes do are based on research, a lot of experiential research, but they also give you tactics that you can use, similar to Never Split the Difference. Negotiation Genius, that fourth book there, is really about the preparation. So all of the things you need to do before going into the negotiation. Whereas the first three are really dealing with yes, preparing, but also what are you doing in the negotiation while the negotiation is happening? And then the last book, I think, is really more about a lifelong journey of finding your particular negotiation style and personality and bringing your values into the process. So they're all kind of slightly different. One of the reasons that I really like Getting More is because it's a little bit more humble than the second two, than Never Split the Difference and Getting to Yes. Even you can hear it in the title, right? Getting to Yes. Like, how do you get the agreement that you want? Or Never Split the Difference. It almost sounds like you're not compromising at all. Getting More doesn't ever say, hey, if you use this methodology, you will reach the agreement. It's not like that. It's a little bit more like saying, if you use these methods in this methodology, you will get the same or more than you would get if you don't use these. Whereas sometimes you read a negotiations book and they're so positive about your ability to reach agreement in every situation. You wonder, well, why don't they just take this and use it in negotiating peace between Israel and Palestine, for instance? So I like the humility of the Getting More approach, and it's focused specifically more so than most of them on the person that you're dealing with. The second book, Never Split the Difference, does deal with the psychology, but Getting More even goes more into the emotional, behavioral, experiential mindset of the people. So I just wanted to talk about them and just make sure you realize there are many, many others, and we're going to be focusing on Getting More, specifically the third chapter. If you have read the book or have a copy, some books, depending on which edition, will have a different title for chapter three, the chapter that we'll be talking about. Some may have some more words and then end with misperceptions and miscommunications. Mine just says perception and communication, which is what we'll be talking about. One of the questions that people sent ahead of time was about best practices, which was really easy for me to incorporate in the talk because the entire chapter is set up as best practices, which we will talk through now. The first best practice is to always communicate. If you don't communicate, you can't negotiate. But I've seen so many situations, especially on the level of nations, that are like, nope, we're not going to talk to those people, or no, I'm upset with that person, so I'm not going to talk. Remember, if you don't talk, you can't reach an agreement. And so you either have to deal with litigation, no agreement, or fighting, like war in the case of countries. And when you do communicate, it's really important, number two, to always listen and ask questions. Everything that you get, all the information that you get is really important to help you figure out how you can reach an agreement. And remember, what you say is less important than what they say. And actually, what you think they said or what you think you said is less important than what they think they heard. So you always have to be questioning to get at what did they hear and what are they saying. And as you do that, you don't want to blame them, number three. You really want to value them because when you blame them, all motivation for an agreement is gone and lost out the window. They become defensive. They may want to criticize you at the same time. So as you're trying to value them, one of the number one ways you can value them is to summarize often. Reflect back what you think you've heard, right? Because what you think you've heard might be different than what they think they said. And when you do that, you are valuing them, but you also give them an opportunity to correct what you thought you heard, which might be different than what they thought they said. One of the things it can also do is help frame it in a way that maybe leads to what you're trying to get. So, for instance, let me see if I have it correct. You're saying that I need to pay 100% of the agreed cost, even though you've only delivered 10% of the agreed services. Oh, well, when you say it like that, okay, yeah, that doesn't make sense. So sometimes summarizing and restating can actually put things in a perspective that allows them to see that something may not make sense. It can get you to an agreement. And so it's really important as you do this work, number five, to do a role reversal. Put yourself in their shoes, which as service designers, if you are a service designer, I think you're supposed to be an expert at, or at least skilled, or at least experienced in empathy. And now, whether or not empathy is achievable or something that we can truly do, that's a whole nother talk. But we at least in our field strive for empathy. So try putting yourself in the position of the person you're negotiating with, their thoughts, their feelings, their actions, their behavior, what's kind of going on and motivating them. And you don't have to be secretive about it. Be open about it. Address it and be transparent that you're trying to address those things because that can go a long way. Sometimes, even though you're not blaming them, they may blame you. They may criticize you. If someone says something like that and calls you a dirty liar, don't, it's okay that you're emotionally activated, but don't act or speak on that emotional activation. Just pause for a moment, process it, take it in, and again, use your designer researcher skills of asking why, of the five whys, of asking those investigative questions that we do when we're doing research or discovery research to figure out what's going on. Wait, oh, how am I lying? Or why do you think that I'm a liar? Try to get to the root of it. And all the information that you get when they answer is helpful for you in that negotiation. Also in future negotiations, remember, this is a really important point. A negotiation is never over, at least this is what Stuart Diamond says, until you say it's over, which means it's not always true, but it's important to remember that just because you don't get to an agreement or maybe what you want in this conversation or this session doesn't mean it can't happen in future ones. And that's really important because as you have the conversation or as you go to future ones, you want to always re-articulate your goals. Again, another power or skill of service designers, often who are working iteratively, is to update and iterate, right? We also do that with our goals as we do negotiations. You should adapt them as you understand. Now, there is what we call in systems thinking or in systems practice, there is this negative dynamic that we call a system archetype, where your goals degrade. Like you have a goal and then you see what happens and it doesn't do as well. So you're like, oh, maybe that goal's not possible. So you put less effort in and you offer a lower goal and then it's even lower and it goes on and on and on. That's not what I'm saying here, but what I'm saying here is that sometimes you get information as you negotiate that lets you know maybe the goal you have isn't the best goal. So adjust it iteratively as you go. You want someone to work 50 hours a week, and then you find out, well, wait a minute, that person has a medical condition, and by law, you are required only at maximum to have them work 36 hours a week. Okay, well, you can ask yourself that question. Well, why did I want them to work 50 hours a week? Oh, it's because there's some amount of work, some body of work that I needed to get done. So maybe that's your goal. Okay, so the goal is how does this, I want to get this work done. And then you can talk with them about ways to get that done, which might involve other people or other ways of streamlining the work. So re-articulate and be willing to adjust those goals. As you do that work, you don't want to damage the relationship. The best way to have a negotiation is in person. If you can't do it in person, audio, some kind of thing where you can hear the voice. And that's because tone, you can hear the tone. In person, you can also see the body language. But if you have to do written communication, be very careful. Make sure you use tone signaling words because normally they have to interpret the tone. Try to not respond when you're angry. Sometimes you can draft a response and then come back and reread it. You can do a role reversal, put yourself in their shoes. Imagine being the person on their worst day. Ask a friend to read it. Think of their other communication style. There are lots of ways you can try to improve written communication. My preference would be to do it at least over audio and if you can in person. And when you do it in person, look for small signals. Actually, this is really, I've seen a lot of in Japanese business groups when they do negotiations, you'll notice they often do negotiations as a group. There might be one person talking, but they bring a bunch of people. And the reason they bring a bunch of people is those people are observing, they're listening, they're watching, and they're taking notes. So after the negotiation session, they come back and they say, okay, um, what did you see? What did you hear? And they kind of compare notes. Everything that you see and hear is information that you can use to be more persuasive or to get to something that you're trying to reach, some goal that you're trying to achieve, or some mutual benefit that you're trying to reach. So maybe sometimes if you go into an important meeting, you can bring someone with you because they may be able to see or hear something that you didn't see. The main thing I think in negotiation to remember is that the most important thing are people. It's more important than the process you use. It's more important than the substance you use. And the negotiation with the same people over the same topic today is a different negotiation than a negotiation with the same process on the same topic tomorrow. Because the person that you're dealing with is in a different emotional state. They ate a different breakfast, different things are going on in their life. People, 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 it's the most important thing. And one of the things that's different between people is that they have different images in their head of what they have in their head and what I have in their head. So this chapter is focused on communication, and related to communication, the practice is always communicate those perceptions so that you can find out when there are differences. A good example is best practice number 11. How you make commitments? A good example, there's a Saudi Arabian company that made a deal with a U.S. American company, and they wrote a contract and they signed it. Saudi Arabian people go back to the country, and as the companies are working, the U.S. company realizes the Saudi Arabian company isn't doing what they agreed to do in the deal. And so the one person from the U.S. company called the Saudi Arabian company and said, "Hey, you're not fulfilling the deal that we had." They said, "What deal?" "The deal that we have written down in the contract." "Oh, yeah, yeah, we haven't done that." "Yeah, why?" "Because we don't have a deal." "What do you mean we don't have a deal? We have a contract." "Yes," the Saudi Arabian company says, "we have a written contract, but we never met in person, made an oral agreement, and then shook hands." And so there's a difference between the two companies in terms of their perception of how are commitments made. Yes, the Saudi Arabian company agrees that there is a written contract, but for them, a binding agreement requires an in-person meeting with an oral commitment and a handshake. And that wasn't there, so it wasn't binding. So, as you do this work, think about that. My next tip from the book is about when you make decisions that affect other people, always consult them. Otherwise, they get upset and you miss out on good ideas that they might have. It doesn't mean that you have to accept what they say, but it is important that you tell them how you will make the decisions because people get upset if they give you their opinion and then you don't follow it and they didn't understand what the process you were going to use to make the decision given their opinion. So let them know what other factors you're considering or how you make the decision or if there are other opinions that you're also considering. And you can give people a deadline if there's a fast turnaround that you need. The last two tips that we'll talk about before we go through some examples are just focus on what's in your control. This is one of the thing about those books that I showed you at the very beginning is that unfortunately they're all written by people kind of mostly in the same social location. All, uh, uh, European American or white people, Caucasian people, mostly men. And so sometimes there can be slight differences, and you'll see some of those differences even with me when I talk about the book. So yesterday is gone, yes, and litigation does focus on the past and reparations and blame and repair, whereas negotiation is supposed to focus on tomorrow and value. But I will say there are situations in which value is attributed to the past. There are situations when you talk about things like genocide and harm and slavery, et cetera, where people are still dealing with unprocessed trauma that, yes, occurred or seems to have occurred in the past, but is still very much present, in which the past is present. Now, the future can also be past and the future can also be present. We could talk about how those are inextricably tangled, but there are people groups for which you actually have to address that. You have to go through some kind of healing in order for tomorrow and the value for tomorrow to even be possible. So usually in our situation as a service designer, hopefully that's not the situation, but I just want to give a caveat that sometimes you do have to address yesterday in the past. Oftentimes in our situations in work, you can let that go because oftentimes trying to control the past and what happened can take you away from your goals. Similar, the same thing is what is right. you have to set a pri list of priorities. W- I care about what's right. I care about my goal in this negotiation, but what's most important? And if the goal is most important, whatever you're trying to achieve, then you may be willing to let go of what being right or being considered right to get to your goal. Because sometimes you can't have both in some situations. Again, I will give a caveat. There's some negotiations that I've been involved in that deal with people that are dealing with some of these historical and still yet present, ever living traumas and histories where there is a recognition of going through some type of healing that it involves an apology or something like that. Oftentimes in our work situations, that's not the case. So I just wanted to give that caveat about doing that work. So let me give two quick examples, and then we'll go into some Q&A at the half hour. I was involved in a situation in which we were building out a global education program that had multiple tracks. There was a track for teaching people how to be a DevOps systems engineer, how to build mobile apps and web apps, but there was a track on just digital literacy. And I was working for this multinational corporation. And I said to this VP, the VP of engineering, he was over the Google search, who wanted this project. I said, look, we need to kind of go out and figure out what the needs and desires of people before we create this digital literacy curriculum. He's like, no, we don't want to do that. And honestly, the company had a practice of, at that time, they don't do it as much today, but they would release products that were built in beta and just put it out and learn from how people are using it in production, right? They don't do that as much now, but that was something they do. And in fact, because people don't always have those resources, because people don't have the money to fail in big ways, that's why we have methodologies that have been created like lean or lean startup, where you learn in small ways before you invest resources because you only have time or the money to invest one set of resources. But when you're a super, super rich multinational company, you can throw, tens of millions of dollars or something. If it doesn't work, do it again. And so that's what they were doing. So we put it out by the specific date, the specific year in September. He wanted to have 150,000 certifications of people who had reached a particular level of digital literacy. When that date occurred, we only had 1,500, so 1,500 registrations, not even certifications, and zero registrations. No one found value in delivering or facilitating it. No one found value in taking it. And so I tried again. And the reason I'm telling you the story is because I need you to understand failures. A lot of times in talks, we always tell you all the successes, but I fail a lot and I've learned a lot from those failures in negotiations. And so this is an example of that. And so I'm coming back and I'm saying, look, it didn't work. So now can I have the time to go out and do this research? Because I think if we do spend the time, we can figure out how to frame and redesign this curriculum so that people will be interested in taking it. I didn't put myself in his shoes. I didn't do a role reversal. I didn't think about what was most important to him. I was thinking about success, but there was something driving him more important than success, and it was time. It was delivery. He's like, no, 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 no. We're even further behind now that it didn't work. We have less time. Just make some changes and put it out again. So put it out a second time, and for the second time, my negotiation failed. It failed again this second time. And so now coming the third time, and I'm saying the same thing. Look, obviously something's wrong. Something's wrong with what we have, and we really need to uncover what. No, no, no. We're even further behind now that we've launched it twice and it hasn't. So just make some changes, put it out again. Put it out a third time. And again, I failed a third time in negotiating because I wasn't putting myself in his shoes and I wasn't asking questions to get at the heart of what he was working on. It failed the third time. And he quit. He left the company. We were working, to be honest, in a part of the company that they call, what do they call it? At that time, they called it emerging markets. So we were working in low to middle income countries around the world. And we had really ambitious goals, but we were often dealing in lower resource settings, right? Where it was harder to do some of the work that we were doing in the Congo, um, uh, in Sudan, in Indonesia, et cetera, right? And so I think we reached our goals, our company goals, maybe less than 50% of the time, whereas the main part of our company reached our goals maybe 75% of the time. And so we just had a lower rate. And so he left the company. The project lead, I wasn't the project lead, left. I became the project lead, and this moved to a new VP of education and diversity and education. So this time I said, how can I put myself in the role of the person? And also, by the way, as you listen to the story, remember that this is a perfect example of a negotiation is not over until you say it's over. Because I could have treated it as over each time, but I'm thinking of this as a continued negotiation over multiple tries and attempts. So now this is the fourth time now with a new person, and I say, look, this has failed three times. Um, I switched to a time-based mode because I've been asking questions to understand. I say, if I could do some research and get you a change curriculum in a month's time, would you be willing to give me the space to do that so we could launch something a month later that I think is better attuned to the people? And I'm jumping to the conclusion, but her answer was yes, but I won't give you any resources. Now, I needed resources, and so she was wrong. She needed to give me resources, but I didn't focus on being right. I just said, okay, I'll take that, and I had to figure out creatively how I could do it. There was a program in the company where people could volunteer a month of their time away from their job to do community-based projects. We normally took projects from outside the company. We didn't have enough of those, so they came to me and I said, "Yeah, I got a ton of community projects because that's what I was doing in the organization." So I gave them a bunch of options and they chose this project. And so I was able to take not a product manager, a data scientist, a software engineer, a designer, a researcher, but I took a salesperson, a marketing person, et cetera, three different people from three different countries, and we got together and formed a team with local people in North Central India. This is like in the around the Delhi region, and we did the work. We did the work, and the results were hundreds of thousands of people in Bangladesh. This pictures from Bangladesh reached a particular level of digital literacy, 9,000 in Colombia and 10,000 in South Africa, 12,000 in Ghana, 14,000 in Mexico. I can go on and on. And this was just the prototype. I'm not even talking about a pilot. We even had millions in India through the Sati program that used the bike. And every time it was recontextualized about how to do it. But I learned valuable lessons about what it means to ask questions, to do role reversals, and not to worry about who was right. Notice that in the negotiation, I'm not worried about doing all 14 different, best practices. You usually use a few of them and you might have to switch, but, try a few, see how it goes, and you go from there. I'll give you one more story before we stop and move into Q&A. I was working with NASA. We had a service that offered technical assistance and financial assistance to small businesses or to collaborations between small businesses and research institutions. We focused on minority-owned small businesses and women-owned small businesses because we just didn't have enough representation. We focused on minority-serving institutions, universities, and women's colleges. And they had a technology, but they didn't have the network or the skills or really the money to advance the technology so that they could commercialize it or infuse it into government projects. So we helped them with money, we helped them with technical assistance to get it there. And I wanted to do a participatory approach where I brought, you know, people from those businesses, from those universities onto our team as full-time members working through it. And that just wasn't how most companies don't want to do that. They don't want to relinquish control and they don't want to pay people full-time for that kind of work. But I thought it was the best way to get to those outcomes. So I had to put myself in their position. I listened to some of the things that were saying, and I realized that they didn't understand the connection between customer experience and employee experience. I also knew they were more willing to have employees do some of what I was saying than customers outside the org. So first, I explained the connection between customer experience and employee experience, and I said, what if we just focus on employee experience? Because one of the things, it's not in this chapter, but that one of the whole approach, if you read the book, is about thinking of things incrementally. So I'm not working yet on the big goal. Right now, I'm just working on one step towards it. So what if we do a radical participatory design and research approach just with employees on employee experience as a first step? Number one, that'll have an impact on customer experience, but then it'll let them feel better about doing with customers. So that's what we did. One mistake I made is that I didn't understand how people make different commitments. So they said, how much time do you want from people? I said, well, what about 40%? Is that okay with you? They said, sure. They took me in front of everyone. I made a presentation. Who wants to volunteer? Give me 40% of your time and your workload will reduce 60%. So even though they made an oral commitment to reduce people's workload by 60%, they did nothing actually to reduce people's workload by 60%. So it was really hard for people. But I will tell you, I got 13 people out of a organization, a part of NASA that had about 100 people. That was more than 10% of people that were interested in doing this. And we were able to completely revise and revamp this program and improve outcomes for minority-owned small businesses and women-owned small businesses. But it took a lot of negotiation and getting there and taking steps before we got to the point of bringing in people from outside. So I'll stop there. And then we can go. I have some prompts if you want to talk through some example situations. But I want to, let's see, stop there and we'll do some questions. Let me stop sharing.